Salve te omnes, and welcome back. We are moving along in Aeneid Book 1, and in this video we will be looking at lines 418 to 440, which is the second chunk of the required lines on the AP syllabus. Now, when we left off, we were back in line 209, so we have jumped by 200 lines, and it is useful to know what happened in the meanwhile. So briefly, apart from what is currently showing on the screen, Aeneas has had a rough night, and the following morning he and Achates go forth to examine the land where they are and see if they can find any signs of civilization or perhaps even of their lost comrades. Along the way, they run into a woman, a huntress, who is in fact Venus. Venus has come down in disguise to point Aeneas on his way, specifically to direct him to the city of Carthage, which is actually not far off, and to Queen Dido. Along the way, also, Venus regales Aeneas with the story of Dido's history, which is very important to us, because we need to know who Dido is in this version. And so, as we rejoin Aeneas here in line 418, he and Achates are on the way to Carthage. And a very, very important note is that Aeneas and Achates are invisible. They have been shrouded by Venus in a cloud, which they can see out of, but no one can see them. That's going to be very important when later we see Aeneas and Achates moving through the city of Carthage itself undetected. So let's go ahead and pick up with where we are right here on line 418 with corpuere. Now we know that Aeneas and Achates are the subjects here, so this is corpuerunt. So they seized the viam. They seized the path. Interes, of course, because we're still in the midst of a story, so in the meanwhile, they seized the path qua, this is referring back to the viam, naturally, and it is ablative, where, because it's an ablative, it's the road, where the path revealed it. So a semita here is a path like a footpath, not quite a full-blown paved road, but definitely a path that people have used. And now they climb the hill, ascendebant collem, qui, and this qui, of course, is pointing at the collem, plurimus. Now, plurimus is talking about qui, which is the collem, and your note suggests something like with imposing size, and that's fine, If you don't like that, sometimes, which very, very much, or something like that, which very greatly. Imminet, and we've talked about imminet before, back in the scene when Aeneas and his men first washed up on shore, right? We talked about how the cliffs and the grove threatened or overhung. So same verb here. This is a hill which very much, or with imposing size, if you like, overlooks the city. And your note here, again, points out that urbi is dative, which is because of imminet down here. Imminet is prefixed, and again, in Latin, prefix verbs like datives as their object, sometimes, not all the time. So this hill looks down over the city, and, still the hill, looks, and this is much plainer, spectat, looks from above, desu, or down upon, if you like, the arces adversas. So again, adversas, this was again remembering the scene with the cliffs on the face opposite. So the hill looks down on the citadel opposite. All right, the citadel opposite. Again, this is plural, technically arces and adversas, they are plural, but it is poetry, so if you want to translate it as singular, that is oftentimes perfectly fine. Cities tend to only have one citadel, or you could read this perhaps as an instance of metonymy, referring to the houses or buildings in general, not necessarily the citadel per se. Miratur mol Aeneas. So here we're back to Aeneas now as the subject. Miratur, and we see here miratur, little anaphora. Aeneas is overwhelmed with amazement, so he gazes, he marvels. A deponent verb, of course, miror, hence the objects. Aeneas marvels at the molem, the size, right? And this, of course, is the city. Your note suggests you read this with an understood genitive urbis, the size of the city. But it's the size of it all. He marvels at the size of what is before him. Quondam magalia. Now this phrase is existing in apposition to molem, So again, this is describing Molem, even though it's a noun. Aeneas is marveling at the size of the city. Once upon a time, quondam, magalia, huts, just huts. Right, so the city started off, it was small, but it has become great. That's a marker for potentially good leadership. And he marvels at the portas. This would be gates, not portus, not ports. We'll see those later. These are gates. The strepitum is the noise or the clamor, the raucousness of it all. And the strata viarum. So here we have the paving of the streets. So obviously it's easier to understand this is just something like paved roads, but grammatically that's not exactly what it's saying. He marvels at the paving viarum of the streets. All right, so that's our first glimpse of Carthage. Let's move on now to the next. All right, so having seen the city itself, now we move on and we see the Tyrii. The Tyrii Ardentes, the Ardentes Tyrii. So remember, the Carthaginians are originally from Tyre. That is their mother city, their home city. And so Virgil will call them Tyrii, or sometimes he will refer to them as Poini, which is of course the more common Roman word for Phoenicians. He rarely refers to them as Carthaginienses, which perhaps strikes us as odd, but it's Virgil. So, the Tyrii Ardentes, the eager or burning Tyrians, Carthaginians, instant, they press on, right? They press on with the work is what we understand. And these initial three words might as well exist in their own little space, because this is Virgil setting the scene for everything that follows all the way down here. So for the rest of this particular section, we're going to be dealing with the Tyrii, who are Ardentes and instanting, and that's going to lead to our epic simile in just a moment. Very famous simile. So we could pretend there's a little wall here, a little line. The Carthaginians eagerly, or eager, press on, and then we move on. Pars, some Tyriorum of the Carthaginians, what are they all doing? Some of them are ducere muros, so they're leading, or you might say extending walls, so they're building walls, they're leading them out, and building the citadel. Okay, moliri, this is a deponent verb, so this is a deponent infinitive, moliri. Building, working, constructing the citadel, and subvolvere saxa manibus, literally rolling up. So sub we know means under most of the time, but in verbs, especially verbs of motion, it can have a sense of upwards, right? Upwards. So if we're building something, we're obviously not rolling the rocks down, we're rolling them up. So rolling up rocks with their hands. Okay, so clearly they're all doing it because these rocks are large. Others, because we've had our sum, so pars, others are choosing optare, are choosing a place for, your note points out that this is actually a dative, for a roof. And this could be an instance of metonymy as well. Roof, of course, means homes. So we see people, or buildings in general, but commonly homes. So some people are choosing out spaces where people will live, right? Residential areas. And concludere, we see claudo in here. Concludo is claudo. So enclosing that spot, the locum, still the locum, with, this is actually an ablative, not a dative like tecto, with a ditch. Okay, so they're digging the borders for all of the various buildings that they are selecting places for. So very well planned, very well laid out. All right. And again, all of these you'll notice, ducere, moliri, subvolvere, optare, conclude, all infinitives, okay, all infinitives, and that's fine. All of them depend on instant, okay, all of them. So the Carthaginians press on, or make haste, or hurry to do all of these things. But you'll notice that in the jump from instant to the infinitives, Virgil also signifies that they're very organized. Some of them are doing this, others of them are doing that. Down here we're going to see others, in fact, are doing other things. So grammatically, that's why the infinitives are here, not indirect speech, because these are not accusative subjects. Everything depends on instant. Okay, your note does suggest that they could be construed as historical infinitives, which is potentially just fine, of course, but I've always found it simpler to just take it off of instance. The Tyrians, pressing on, eager, they make haste to do all these things. They're in a big hurry to build their city. Along with building their city, let's scroll down here a bit for the rest. Along with building their city, what else do they do? Well, they legunt. Moving on, they legunt. They choose or elect or pass. It kind of depends on how you understand this verb legunt. Really depends on which object you happen to be reading it with. So legunt iura, they're not really electing justice, right? They're sort of passing laws, something like that. Okay, they are choosing their magistratus. This is where legunt could mean electing. They are electing their magistrates. And they are perhaps, you could say electing, but perhaps gathering their sacred Senate. Because if we think about Rome and the fact that Virgil is Roman and all that, the Senate in Rome was not strictly elected. So again, three objects, three different understandings of legunt. They're making laws, or they're deciding upon justice. They are electing public officials, and they are convening, we might say, or gathering their holy senate. Okay, so that's just the general republic business. Other people are doing other things. Over here, so we see hikik, we see the repetition there, the anaphora of hikik. So again, over here in this spot, some people are effodiunt the portus. This is the port where ships go. They're digging out the port, so they're building a proper port. Carthage had an excellent natural port, but they also improved it dramatically. Over here, so in this other spot, other people are locanting, are placing the alta fundamenta. So fundamenta, therefore alta does not mean tall, it means deep. The deep foundations, theatris, just like above when we saw them up here, optare locum tecto, this was dative, kind of the same thing down here. They're placing the foundations for, theatris is dative, for a theater. And then we're going to continue with the theater. And excedunting, this is still the alii. So cutting out, right? Not destroying, this could be a very negative verb, but not in this context, right? They are cutting out from the rocks. The ex in excedunt tells us how to understand rupibus, cutting out from the rocks. Imanis columnas, huge columns, massive columns. And then the columns are what this down here, this little bit here at the bottom, is referring to. The decora alta, the tall, because we're talking about columns now, no longer fundamenta, tall decorations or adornments for, okay, still with the dative, for skynis, which are backdrops or scenes, we've seen this word before, backdrops futuris, to come, right? So they're thinking ahead of all the wonderful shows and performances that will be put on in this theater, set in front of these huge columnas, imanis columnas, right? So we see a very, very well thought out, very well planned, very put together city coming into existence. All right, so let's move on now to the next bit. Okay, so here we are now, and qualis. Oh, qualis. We know what this means. Qualis labor. Qualis tells us, of course, that we are moving into a simile. And this would be the second epic simile that we have seen so far in Book 1 of the Aeneid. The first, of course, being the comparison of Neptune to the man who calms a riot merely by his presence and with his words. So now we are comparing the Carthaginians and all of their labor, all of their efforts that we just saw detailed out, to the sort of labor that exercet apes. This kind of work exercises bees. And this is frequently just referred to as the bee simile in Book 1, the Aeneid simile of the bees. Important grammatical note, qualis is very often by students who are moving a little quickly perhaps, or not watching out. Qualis is often taken with apes, just like bees, but that's not actually what is happening. The qualis here is actually working with the labor, because that's the focus of the simile. The work that the Carthaginians are doing is the kind of work that drives bees. even though, of course, we understand the Carthaginians in this simile are supposed to be the apes, and in fact, if we look forward at our following verbs, educunt, stipant, distendunt, accipiunt, and there's more, the bees become the subject of the rest of the simile. But for right now at the start, we are comparing the labor that they do. There's a lot of description here going on, right, because this is very straightforward, just like the sort of work that exercises the bees when aestate nova, so in the new summer, or at the start of summer, per flore rura, through the flowering countryside, neuter plural, right, per accusative, sub sole, under the sun, right, because bees don't really do a ton of work at night. All right, and then moving on, cum. Gentis we see is not ablative, it's actually genitive, so we know cum does not mean with, so let's do a quick glance down here at our verb, educunt. This is an indicative mood verb, not a subjunctive, so we know right away that cum here means when. And so so this cum means when, and Virgil is going to be detailing all of the work that the bees are doing, just like he detailed all of the work that the Carthaginians were doing. And again, if you remember back to some of the biography of Virgil, it is generally accepted that his father kept bees, so Virgil knows a great deal whereof he speaks when he goes into all of the detail that the bees, all the work that the bees are doing, because he almost certainly had firsthand knowledge of it through watching his father. So, what do the bees do? Well, when they educunt, so simply bring forth, not educate, bring forth the adultos fetus, literally the offspring, right, fetus, but fully grown of their race. So the fetus gentis, this gentis is genitive, going with fetus. So the full-grown offspring of their race, because if you know bees, their larval stage goes into a cell, gets boarded up with wax, and then they mature, and then they break through, they break out. So the bees bring forth the full-grown offspring of their race, or when they stipant, so they pack in, the liquentia mella, the flowing honey, the liquid honey, and distendunt, the kellas, they extend or stretch the cells, this is literally just cells, right, like the cells of a beehive, with the dulci nectare, with the sweet nectar. Obviously, of course, referring right up here to the mella, the honey. All right, let's move down here to see the rest of it. Or, there's more that they do. They accipiunt the onera, so they receive or accept or take the burdens, venientum. Notice the present active participle here, which means we're in the third declension. So this is a genitive plural form, not an accusative. Don't be tricked. So they receive the burdens of the venientum, of the ones who are coming. So this, of course, is the worker bees go forth, they gather pollen and whatnot, and then they bring everything back to the hive, and when they fly back, other bees take what they've brought. Or, then we have a little ablative absolute here, with a line having been formed. So, there's some kind of military sense going on here, right? Because we know an agmen is a marching line, frequently used, and we've seen it already in the case of the winds, used agmine facto, with a line having been formed, right before the winds attacked. What do they do having formed a line? They arcent. They keep something away from something. So what are they keeping away from what? Well, technically, they are keeping away the fucos. All right, this is the object of arcent right here. And then ignavom pecus is actually standing as an appositional phrase to the fucos. So it's describing the fucos. So they keep away the drones. You'll very rarely ever see this word again. The drones. And what are the drones? Well, they are an ignavom pecus, a lazy herd or group. Right? This is a word used of sheep oftentimes. Flock. They are a lazy flock. And where are they keeping them away from? From the mangers, right? From the feeding troughs. Okay, from the hives. So this, of course, refers to the fact that drone bees don't do a lot of the actual heavy lifting in a beehive, and so it is up to the worker bees to keep that lazy herd away from all the food, because otherwise they will just eat it all. And here we are at the end, now having seen all of the work. The opus fervet. The work boils, literally. And this is such a great verb because, again, if you've ever seen bees at work, especially when they're packed in tight and climbing over each other and whatnot, it does in fact look perhaps like a pot boiling over. So the work boils, and the fragrant honey, notice the verb change here, so we know our subject changed. The fragrant honey smells, we would say of time, but Latin uses tumo, okay, with time. All right, and this tumo, by the way, you'll hear that when I translated it, I did it with redolent, but you could just as easily be with fragrantia. There's no reason to prefer one to the other. You could say the honey, fragrant with time, gives forth its scent, or just smells, smells pleasant. But you could also just say that the fragrant honey lets forth its odor with time, or something like that. Okay, smells of time. So tumo, there's no particular reason to prefer one with the other, and thus its positioning here is quite lovely in the middle of redolent and fragrantia. So that is the end of the simile of the bees. Let's move on here to the end of this first bit. Okay, and here we are then at the very last 4 lines of this first part, lines 418 to 440. Here we have Aeneas I.418, so Aeneas cries out, he says, and again, he's in the cloud, so no one can see or hear him. O fortunati, quorum ja moenia surgunt. So he's speaking now to the Carthaginians. This is vocative. O lucky ones, right? We understand ones from this masculine plural, whose walls now rise. Okay, so the moenia is the subject of surgunt. Your walls are rising. That makes you fortunati. That makes you lucky. So Aeneas said this, and he looked, now we would say up perhaps, but it's just more he looked at, okay, he looked over the heights of the city, something like that. So he gazed upon the tops of the city. And then he infert, this actually should be underlined, but oh well, because it is a verb. He infert se, so he carried himself, so he went, right? He carried himself, he went. Saeptus nebula, cloaked or shrouded in the cloud. Mirabile dictu. We've talked about dictu before. It's another supine, acting in the ablative case with mirabile, which is referring to this entire bit right here, particularly the Saeptus nebula, cloaked in a cloud, an amazing thing to speak of, being cloaked in a cloud of invisibility. Per medios, right? So he went through the midst of the people. Medios, accusative, masculine. That's how we know people. And he miscet viris, so he mixed with the men, right? Something like that. He mixed with the men. Viris, by the way, even though we're saying with, miskeo wants a dative. Viris is dative. So he mixes among the men, and he is not perceived, carinatur, not deponent, actual passive. He is not seen by, even though it is dative, but it is a dative of agent, by anyone. And you could say that neque uli here is, again, perhaps a bit of a temesis, because you might have just said, and he is seen nulli, by no one, but that's ultimately up to you and your understanding. All right, so that is the end of this particular portion. We have made it now to Carthage, and when we come back at line 494, we will be in the presence of the queen herself, Queen Dido. So I will see you all then. Walete.